People often ask me why I underexpose when I'm using the Sigma FP or even the Komodo for that matter. And that's because one of the first things I do when I get a new camera is I test the limits of that specific camera's sensor. When a project is shot on real film, cinematographers will select the analog film that they're going to use based upon the project. So they'll test all kinds of various types of films that have different ASA ratings, different grains, different renderings, etc., etc. And in the digital realm, more experienced DPs have the luxury of selecting literally any sensor they want for that specific job, much like they would choose the right film for the right job. Now, the nice thing is the American Society of Cinematographers have an awesome camera test they use, and they've outlined it in a chapter of their 11th edition of the ASC manual called Take Ownership of Your Sensor. Now, the author of this test, Richard Crudo, was the cinematographer on big movies like American Pie and Down to Earth, and broadcast shows such as Justified and Jane the Virgin and SWAT, amongst many, many others. But more notably, he is a past president of the ASC and a former governor of the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences. So let's take a look at the very first paragraph because Richard is much more eloquent at explaining this than I. A full understanding of your sensor's limits will determine how lighting is rendered on screen and, by extension, how it influences the final look of the project. Establishing the limits of your sensor also takes much of the guesswork out of the colorist's daily protocol and places a great deal of control of the image where it belongs, in the hands of the cinematographer. So it's as simple as testing the over and under exposure parameters of any camera sensor, and that's exactly what we're going to do today. Now, it's important for me to point out that this is not the same as a dynamic range test. This is more about understanding the limits of your camera sensor in regards to exposure from a working creative standpoint, crafting the look of your image based upon the knowledge of knowing how far you can push either the ISO or the lighting. Dynamic range only tells you so much. This over-under test is designed for those who want to craft a certain look. So one of the ways to take full control of the image you're capturing is to perform this over-under test as it's outlined in the ASC manual. And this goes hand in hand with creating custom LUTs for individual projects, because every single project has different lighting conditions, different color palettes, different talent with various skin tones, and there's no real way to find what you think is the sweet spot of the image without first performing this over-under test. The camera I first tested myself was the Sigma FP, but if you'd like to see the test results from the Red Komodo or the Sony a7S III, let me know down in the comments below. However, for today's video, we are looking at the Sigma FP because that is what I do get asked the most about. This is stuff we talk about every week over on the Dog Times Patreon, which leads me to this video sponsor, the #1 sponsor of this channel from day one. It is the Dog Times Patreon. Over there, I have 4 different tiers or levels of membership to choose from, each of them coming with their own awesome perks. It is hands down the best way to support this channel with getting the most back in return. With that being said, I gotta give a shout out to this month's Patreon producer, which is David Carroll, but also thank you to all of my loyal Dog Times Patreon supporters. I'll see you over there in our private Dog Times Discord chat. Or the most easiest, cheapest, freest way to support the show is just tap that subscribe button, hit the bell so you get notified each time I drop a new video, hit the like button, hit the share button, and share around your top favorite videos of mine. Let's keep this channel growing because without subscriptions, we will die. All right, let's jump into this and look at the Sigma FP and also break down to you how you can perform the over-under test on any camera of your choice. Let's first talk about the basic setup, okay? Now, I've done this exactly as it's outlined in the 11th edition. You can find this, you can pick this up off of the American Society of Cinematographers website. It goes for about $95. I would encourage you guys to pick it up. It is an amazing reference guide. If you don't have an annual subscription to the ASC, you're doing yourself a huge disservice. It is hands down the best way that you should stay plugged in, you know, if you're taking your cinematography seriously. Anyways, that's a shameless plug for ASC. I have no affiliation with them, by the way. Obviously I'm a fan of them because I'm a working freelancer in cinematography right here in LA. Okay, so as you can see here on the screen record, this is the basic setup, okay? Now I have my little speed editor here, so I can just tap full view and we can go full view here and check it out. So this is actually what you want to do. You want two show cards, right? One white, one black. Now, what I picked up was just some nice matte finish foam board from Joann Fabrics. You can get stuff at any arts and crafts store. The idea is a good size would be at least 3x4 each, and you want to stack them horizontally, not vertically, okay? And this is the fashion you want them in, and we'll talk about that once we get into the light setup, okay? And it's light, not lighting. This test is done with one light, and we'll talk about that real quickly here. But first, show cards. The white show card on the right side of the frame, the black show card on the left. And don't worry about the seam, because that seam is kind of a guide for where you want your talent or model or stand-in, or in my case, myself, where you're going to stand right down the middle of where those two show cards meet. And as you'll see there, you're going to want some sort of color chart. I use my trusty color checker Passport for video made by X-Rite. I love this thing. It has the exposure steps. It has the chart. This chart is actually integrated with the DaVinci Resolve software. On the other side, you have a gray card, and then you have your focus chart. As you can tell, it is hard-backed, hardcore plastic. I take this on set with us. It's amazing. I'll have links to all this stuff down below to help you out. Also, that's another free way at no extra charge to anyone, a way to support the show, right? And then this is a big gray card. This was just a leftover one from my days at film school. You will need some sort of color checker chart and some sort of gray card, because these things will be used to assess what happens to the colors once we start jumping over and under exposures, right? Because we will be overexposing up to 3 stops and we'll be underexposing by 3 stops, okay? This shadow is what is crucially important. This shadow you see here falling on the black show card. That's why it's important to put the black show card on the left side of the frame or opposite of where the light is. You want to use a hard source and not a soft source. The reasoning is because a soft source is not going to give you this nice defined shadow on your black show card, okay? And again, that shadow is going to come in clutch when we start analyzing the underexposures. Also, a key thing is here, notice there's no hotspot, because I am using a hard source, and what I use is just what I keep here in the studio. It's the little small rig 220B, B for bicolor. I did a full review on that long ago. I'll leave a link to that down in the description below. As long as you stay above 4500 Kelvin, it is very, very accurate, okay? But the key thing is here, because you're going to be using a little mono light like that, that's kind of the way to go. If you have a color meter, hopefully you have a reliable source that you can rely on. Again, the newer the LED unit is, the more accurate it'll be. Remember, we talked about that in my past videos. Links down below if you're brand new here, okay? But notice there is no hotspot, so that's just a matter of pulling up false color on the camera. The FP has that inside of it, so you can watch that, and you can just kind of slowly fan that mono light off so you're not getting any crazy hot spots here, because we don't want any hot spots. But it is a little tricky when you're using a mono light source with no diffusion. That's the trick, no diffusion, okay? Something to help me out, though, with that hotspot. Rather than using the 45-degree reflector, I used a little mini dome, the aperture mini dome. That's just gonna help you get a wider spread without using any diffusion. Okay, so that's the idea of the lighting setup there. Richard Crudeau, in the ASC manual, he does recommend placing the light at a 20-degree angle off of camera right. Make sure you get a nice thick shadow here on your black show card. So now you're seeing why the placement of these show cards is so important. Putting the black one on the left and the white one on the right, right? It's all about that shadow. And you do want to keep the color checker chart and the gray card on the black show card, because on the white show card, we're going to use a white piece of paper with some details and stuff, because I did do this test some time ago, so I'm really glad that I put my details on there. Now, it's going to be a little hard to see this because you're shooting this test at a 2.8. This test was performed with the first native base ISO of the Sigma FP, which is 100. And that's important. You're going to want to go with whatever the first base native ISO of the cameras you're using. Or if you think you're going to shoot more at the second base native ISO, then start the test out with that one. Or you could just test both base native ISOs. I didn't really have any desire to do that. I just stayed at base ISO 100. That's the one I prefer to shoot at, because the FP in other tests that I've done, the low light performance is actually better at the first base native ISO versus 3200. But if you're just running and gunning, and especially for stills, just jump to 3200. But if you're trying to do more of a creative project, I would stay on that base native ISO of 100. But again, this is the whole point of why we do this test in the first place. So also here you'll see it was my 75mm Schneider Xenon full frame cine lens. We do have the lens set to a T28. That is important. Here with my sign, you can see the light is also set to a T28, and the shutter is a 180-degree shutter angle at 24 frames per second. This test is going to be pretty damn hard for you to do if you don't own a light meter. You could get by without the color meter. Light meter is going to be pretty important because when you get to the overexposure side, you do that with the light, the dimmer on the light, not within the camera itself. The internal white balance is 5,000 Kelvin, so I set the camera to 5,000 Kelvin, and I had to also set the light to 5,000 Kelvin. Again, if you don't have a color meter to truly check the accuracy of this, that's gonna be a little hard for you to do. That's why I say pick a more reliable, newer LED unit, and hopefully it'll be somewhat close. As you'll notice, this SmallRig 220B, it was pretty close. I only had to put the light to 5,034 Kelvin to get a true 5,000 Kelvin on a meter, so that is super, super accurate in the way of LED units. Really super impressive for such a cheap LED unit too. By the way, the entire review for that SmallRig 220B is in the description below. Also, another important thing to do or to talk about is they say, why did you go with 5,000 Kelvin on both the light and the camera? The reason why 5,000 Kelvin is because the late and great Jeffrey Boyle, and actually the ASC kind of agrees with this too to some extent, is that the native white balance of any digital sensor is usually around 5,000 Kelvin. The ASC kind of leans more on 5,500 Kelvin. Jeffrey Boyle kind of solidified in me that it's 5,000 Kelvin. White balance of any digital sensor is always going to be leaning more on the 5,000 to 5,500 Kelvin range. They just respond better to that color temperature, okay? Now, in terms of picture profiles, no picture profiles, right? Ideally, you'd want to do log. The downside here, as you know, if you are an FP user, we don't have log, which is kind of limiting the dynamic range, one of the downsides of the Sigma FP. So for a test like this, you just need to make sure the picture profile is off, and then go into your tone curve and make sure that's flattened out, you know, set to neutral, no crazy tones, turn all that stuff off. Also check your tint levels, whatever camera you're on, no crazy tint, right? Make sure that's set to 0, right? We want to start at a very baseline here. Okay, next is make sure you're shooting at the highest codec possible that your camera can do. Highest codec, least amount of compression. Kodak? That was close to sounding like Kodak, right? Codec. Okay, with the FP, that means having to export 4K 12-bit cinema DNG via the USB-C to an SSD, right? So it gets a little convoluted. I would highly recommend doing SSD versus something like Blackmagic RAW or ProRes RAW to an external recorder, because keep in mind, Blackmagic RAW and ProRes RAW are all compressed RAW, right? We want to try to get the strongest codec you can get out of the camera for tests like this. Dynamic range test, over-under test, any real camera test, you're putting the camera through the paces, you want to get the beefiest you can get out of what the camera can offer, okay? So in the end here, you'll notice you're going to end up with 15 different shots, and I've outlined those in here, right? You're going to have 3 normal exposures. Again, that's 24 frames per second, 180-degree shutter with your camera's base native ISO. For the FP, it's 100, right? With the lens at a 2.8 and the light also at a 2.8, okay? That is normal exposure. You're going to have 3 of those. On top of that, you are going to have overexposures in half stops all the way to 3 stops over, as well as up to 3 stops underexposed in half stops, okay? So in the end, you're going to have 15 of these little 10 to 15 second clips, okay? Once you have your light at a 2.8, again, it's gonna be hard if you don't have a light meter to do this. I honestly don't know how you would do this without a light meter, because I don't always trust the histograms and waveforms and stuff that is inside of a camera. I just don't. I mean, I think they're okay for quick references, certainly if you're run and gun style. Why I say this is because cameras just do spot readings. Every camera is a little wonky, and a great way to do this is if your camera can shoot stills. Run out there and, you know, do auto exposure at different varying points of center weighted exposure or entire screen average or any of those. Every camera is kind of off or weird in its own thing because it's just a spot meter. And I talked to a lot of high-end experienced cinematographers who they only use their light meter when they shoot analog. And it's crazy to me because it's like they're just relying on monitors and spot meters of the camera for their exposure levels. I mean, false color is good if you got it. A camera's false color is still just a spot meter. To each their own, but you know, I guess me being so obsessed with the lighting and things like that and spending a lot of days as a gaffer, I don't see why anyone would not just use a light meter. But, you know, to each their own. But to do this test, it's going to be quite hard, because how else will you know that your light is exactly at a 2.8? Or when you get to the overexposure side, how will you know your light is at an f8, which it needs to be for overexposures, which we'll get into right now. Once you have your light for normal exposure set to 2.8 with your lens at a 2.8, you're going to want to take a close-up shot of your color checker chart as well as your gray card. Okay, so that's all going to come in handy to look at when you start looking at seeing what happens to the colors when it's over or underexposed versus the true colors of normal exposure on that specific camera sensor. The first thing is you want to go to the RAW tab, if your camera can do RAW. If not, it's not a big deal. But for those of you that your camera can do RAW, you're gonna wanna go in here and change your color space and your gamma to whatever that camera is, because it may not automatically be set up to that unless it's a Blackmagic camera, let's be honest. With the FP, I did have to change this from Rec 709 to P3D60. Now, if you don't know the color space of your camera, the easiest way to do that is to go just shoot some stills with that camera. Hopefully, if it lets you, you will know immediately what color space it is in, because you can pull up the raw file and look at the metadata, you know, right click get info, and you can look in there and you can see what the color space is. And for the FP, it is in fact P3. So for our options here, we just have P3D60, which is fine. That's the closest we're gonna get to the true color space of the Sigma FP. Now the gamma, I did leave it at sRGB. The true gamma of the FP is Adobe RGB, which is actually 35% wider color space than sRGB. We did talk about that in the first big massive initial review of the FP I did. sRGB will get you somewhat there. Now, granted, a lot of this gamma is going to be based upon the monitor that you're viewing on. Since I do have the 2022 version of the M1 Max MacBook Pro with the XDR display, ideally, you know, sometimes I do rock a gamma 2.4, but here you can see how much it lifts it. That's really up to taste. I kind of like it a little more on the crunchy side, so that's why I leave it at sRGB. But you could roll gamma 2.4, but it is going to lift the blacks a little bit, even more so. So just to keep it more realistic to what the true gamma of the FP is, I leave it at sRGB. The one thing you'll notice here, this is my biggest gripe about when shooting in RAW with the Sigma FP. The color temp in the tint always goes wonky. Right? This obviously is not what I did in camera. I just told you guys what I did. I did 5,000 Kelvin with 0 tint. Now, the Kelvin is close enough, right? But still, it's not exactly accurate. But this tint is way off. It went from 0 to 15.86 green. That is insane. That's a lot to really mess up your image. I hate it that it does this. I don't know why it does this. And I feel bad for anyone that's not shooting in RAW with the FP, because it's baking that in. Right? If you're doing the all eye, it's like, oh my God, it's baking in plus 15, pretty much plus 16 green for those images. It would be, I don't understand why that camera does that. So let's just change this to 0. Now you can see right there, my skin tones instantly got better. So this is the baseline, right? This is the base. But now let's switch this up a notch, because like I talked about in the intro, doing this over-under parameter test is really about crafting the look of the show, because this is what we're going to compare all the overs and unders to, because like it talks about in the test in the manual here, it talks about before you do any corrections, you first just want to analyze the overs and unders next to the original, okay? I'm going to right click this and grab a still of this, okay? To do the overexposure, you're going to leave your lens at a 2.8, but you're going to set the light to an f8 and leave it there. The light is going to live at f8 for all of the overexposures. You're just simply adjusting the exposure with the shutter. And you do the same in the underexposure side. But on the underexposure side, the lamp goes back to 2.8. But for the overexposure side, the lamp is set to an 8. And then you adjust each half stop with the shutter angle. Like I said, you got to have a meter, because that's going to give you the general overall ambience. I only do dome in when I'm doing direct per unit source for that exact kind of no spread. Does that make sense? Because it's like, okay, if I do this and the light says, you know, 2.8 or whatever, but then as soon as you point this out, it's probably going to be a little less, quite honestly. And again, we want to make sure that we're getting the entire scene with that 2.8 or that 8 in the overexposure side. Let's say you were gonna come up with some kind of show LUT or show look, right? Now, this is not a color grading tutorial. This is just a way of just saying like, hey, we have this show LUT that we wanna test out and use on the job, right? It's just something to throw in Video Village, okay? So the first thing you wanna do is you want, depending on the LUT you use, now I use all of Red's film looks, which are made for Red IPP2, which is the red wide gamut color space, right? So you have to transform the FP into that space. So one way to do that is we go to our effects panel here. Okay, we're gonna go into our color space transform. We're gonna drop this on, and we're gonna input the color space of the FP and transform it into red, okay? So we do know it's P3 DCI, okay, right here it is. And the reason why I don't choose P3D, because P3D60 is actually not the actual color, it actually is DCI. But we chose D60 down here because that's all they're offering me, okay? So you can do what you want, but I changed mine to the actual color space of the FP. And then our gamma, obviously, we've already decided that has to be sRGB instead of Adobe RGB. And now we're gonna change the output color space to red. So we're gonna go with red wide gamut RGB, and then we're gonna change the output gamma to red log 3G10. Okay, boom. Okay, so now we got something really ugly there, right? And then, you know, leave a couple things if you want to make adjustments, but this is not a tutorial. I'm just going to throw on the final show LUT. So now that I've transformed it into, you know, red log, now I can go in here and say my red IPP2, Devil's Rejects. Okay, so this is the show LUT for Devil's Rejects, and we just decide this is what we're gonna use. You know, the colorist, the DP, the director, I'm just making something up here, right? Like they've all three of them have decided like, yeah, this is our show LUT, the look we're gonna have in Video Village for producers and powers to be and just everybody, right? Something better than, okay, so I also have the micro panel here. I'm just gonna hit bypass real quick. So you say like, that's normal, and then you see it with the show LUT. You know, let's just pretend. Now you can start comparing that against all of the over and unders. And keep in mind, I did adjust the raw tab too, okay? Sharpness, I just leave it +10, I don't care about that. So now what you do is I'm gonna delete that screen grab. I'm gonna take a still of this one. And now what I do here is I'm gonna go first to our +half overexposed, and then I can say, hey, let's apply the grade to that one. Okay, and you'll notice it reset my raw tab, which is great. And now you can start noticing the differences here compared to whatever look you're going to have. Because this is the whole reason why they do this, right? They want to see how it's going to react to the look that they're creating. However, we could bypass this grade if you didn't want to get that extreme for the sake of this YouTube video and you just wanted to see more like what it is. And now that we've reset those, now you can really see what's going on. But that was just an idea of what you could do if you're gonna compare it with the show LUT. I think it's more informative of this video if we look at it for the reality of what it is, right? But the point is that you would wanna somewhat conform this clip. Now we've already conformed it off of the raw tab, right? But if we pull up the scopes here, you can see that when we're normally exposed, it is still even clipped. It's so sensitive to highlights. It's one of the biggest gripes about the FP. My second biggest gripe about the FP is the electronic shutter with no mechanical shutter. Huge pain in the ass, right? I'm on the micro panel here. Let's just say I just want to pull these highlights back a little bit, right? So I'm just pulling these highlights back, right? I'm not going to use a LUT, right? Now I'm just kind of crafting the normal exposure just based off of my eye, something I like, right? Let's go back and look at the vector scope and see, like, I'm okay with this. You can come over here and you can throw a face window on the face just to see what it's doing with the, you know, the hue of the face. Let's pull this up. Let's highlight that. We're doing pretty good where it's sitting on the skin tone indicator there. I'm okay with that. You could maybe shift it over, but for the sake of this, I'm gonna leave it for speed and everything. I'm gonna leave it the way it is. The colors may be a little off. You could maybe just push a little bit this way. So I'm on the offset. I'm just pushing everything a little bit this way. Okay, we got that going there. I am gonna pull back the saturation just a little bit. I like it a little desaturated. You see there, I pulled my highlights almost to a -2. And again, I'm just using the micro panel to just kind of quickly make adjustments here. Okay, so now this is something that I kind of like a low saturated look like that. Maybe if you wanted to, you know, lower the contrast a little bit, go for a more low con look. Maybe you could pick your own show LUT, but let's say you're just creating your own look, right? So this is very base. You know, there's no actual color grade here. It's just a very base kind of correction. So let's say this is our normal thing. So I'm gonna bypass these off and on. That's where it was. This is where we brought it to. I don't know, you could argue and say one's better than the other. I would say that I got it less green, less saturated, and brought it to something like this, kind of like a steel look almost, which I'm okay with. It can be whatever you want it to be, right? That's the point. The point is getting the normal exposure clip somewhere where you like it so you can start analyzing it against all the others, because if that's the look you're trying to go after right now, you want to see how it handles over and under exposures with the look that you've crafted. That's kind of the whole point of this test, right? Again, it goes hand in hand with creating specific show LUTs, okay? This is what we're gonna go with for the sake of my video. It doesn't matter if you like it or not. It doesn't matter if I like it or not. I'm just trying to get a point across with this video, okay? So now we're gonna start jumping, right? So let's jump down here to the +1/2. We have that. Let's apply the grade first of all. So there's the grade, or I guess color correction is what I should call it. And let's A/B this, okay? So there's the normal. Now you can see not nearly as big as a magenta shift now that we've got the raw tab back where it needs to be. So when you apply the grade, it adjusts the raw tab too, which is excellent. And here you go. There you see normal to +1/2. Not bad. You know, actually +1/2 isn't too bad. You know, everything's staying pretty clean. I mean, it is still shifting. Notice that gray card is definitely still shifting colors. Our chart is, you know, you're definitely still getting some color shifts there, you know. Not that bad though, is it? And let's jump to +1. Okay, so the first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna apply our grade. Boom, okay? Now keep in mind, my grade was slightly killing the highlights. Remember that. We're already slightly killing the highlights just on the normal exposure, so that is gonna help these overexposures, right? Okay, so now you can see the raw tabs back to normal here. We're going to A/B this, okay? So it's really just about looking at the color shifts, skin tone, gray card, color charts. Even at +1, it's not bad, is it? It's really not bad now that we've adjusted the grade. You know, honestly, I gotta say this is better than what I was anticipating. I did this test a while back. I did a different version of my own test where this one kind of reveals more. So see, the more scientific, the more accurate you can get, you know, it's gonna reveal things a little bit better for you. But notice the shadows. The shadows themselves have definitely changed colors. Not nearly as rich, nice shadows there, right? So that's something else to consider for whatever look you're after. Again, it's all up to taste. This is all aesthetic, you know? There is no right or wrong here. You're just trying to find where you want to rate the camera and your lighting when you're lighting, you know? +1/2, let's apply the grade. See that? Brought it back down a little bit, but it still can't, right? I would say at this point, the camera has become unusable. Even with slight color corrections based off of a normal exposure, as soon as you hit +1/2 on that camera, it's done, it's over. It's unusable, even with color correction, okay? Again, this is something to point out. This is the whole point of this test, right? This is why I say I always underexpose. And we'll notice when we jump to the underexposure side, it's a little better, right? But now we know, like, you're okay up to +1 over, right? I would maybe lean more on that +1/2 side, but +1, you know you're okay. What that means is you can let your highlights go up to 1 stop. You gotta be really careful about watching that. What I mean by that is if you're going for proper exposure on skin tone for a 2.8, whatever the highlight, practical highlight is in the background, you don't want that to go beyond a 4, right? If that highlight starts going beyond a 4, it's irrecoverable when using the FP, right? This is what you're discovering. So it almost is like a dynamic range test, but it's not at the same time, right? Because the whole point, again, of doing the over-under exposure parameters is finding where you want to live with the specific look of the show, right? And you can only develop the look based upon the normal exposure, right? That's why this is kind of a very advanced test when you start kind of dissecting it, you know, but it's so awesome to do. But yeah, I would say unusable. I wouldn't want to push this camera at a +1/2, even with proper corrections, but let's keep going, okay? Now we're, what does that say, +2? Now we're +2 over. Let's apply the basic corrections there. There you see, you can see it's still tabletop though. It's still gone, right? This is a very extremist look, right? Let's A/B and off with the normal exposure, with the normal grade there, you can see. Not ideal, is it? Let's jump to +2.5, okay? Now we're going to apply the basic grade here. There we go, nothing. Even killing those highlights by 15%, totally, you know, this is why I say, you don't want to push anything in the frame with the Sigma FP beyond 1 stop over. You just wouldn't, not even practicals, because it's gonna kill your entire shot, right? But let's keep going. So now, what's the next one? So here we go with +3, let's apply the basic grade. Yeah. Let's do a little A/B action. Yeah. You wouldn't even be able to do it. But here's something fun. You say, what happens if you were 3 stops over? Try to recover that, Justin. Okay, let's try to recover it. Here we go. I don't think you're gonna be able to. If you had to recover this, the first thing I would do is, so in this instance, I wanna see how much I can recover the face, right? So you would say, oh man, come on. Let's pull back this face. Let's try to recover our face. But I don't think you're gonna be able to. It's pretty tore up, man. If I try to bring this down, the white side is just completely gone. There's no getting that back, you understand? Let's go -3 on our raw tab. Look, you're never gonna get that back. You're never gonna get it back, right? So that's why I say, even if you were to go, let's see, because see, you started losing the detail right at, it's completely gone at 1.5 over, right? It's completely gone 1.5 over. So if you dial it back 1.5, it's gone. You're never gonna get it back. You maybe start to see a little bit peeking in, but you're not gonna get it back, right? So you can't let any practical highlights on the Sigma FP go beyond 1 full stop over. You just can't. When you're running and gunning it, yeah, you're at the mercy of it. Just try to get those things out of the frame. Okay, so let's keep going now. So now we're back to normal exposure here. Let's jump to under 1/2 stop. So now we're under 1/2 stop exposed. We'll apply the basic grade. Now you can see where we're going here. Not a basic grade. I keep calling it a grade. It's not a grade. It's a correction. It's not bad. It really isn't bad. You know, it's funny because when you see the normal this is where your eye can mess with you. When we were looking at the overexposures, the normal started looking underexposed. But as soon as you look at 1/2 stop under, you go, oh yeah, I guess that was normal exposure, wasn't it? -1/2 isn't bad at all, right? I would argue that it's somewhat better fine-tuned for my eyeballs anyways. I mean, you're even getting more detail back in that placard back there. Let's go -1, right? And let's apply the very basic correction that we did. There's that. Okay, raw tab is back to normal there. AB a little off. This is where I actually love to ride the camera. I love to ride it at +1 under. All the time, still cine, it doesn't matter. I'm always 1 stop underexposed on that FP. But look at this interesting fringing happening on that shadow there. Look how clean our shadow is at normal exposure. Look at this weird kind of halo effect your shadow starts getting. So let's keep going now. Let's go -1.5. Let me apply the basic correction here. Let's AB and off this here. Still got some weird, you can almost see that purple fringing. Even with it being 1.5 stop underexposed, you're starting to see that. Let's lift it. Let's play with it. Let's start with our blacks here. Let's bring this up a little bit. Let's just start lifting this and see what happens. Let's go with our whole offset here. Yeah, see, as soon as you start lifting it, you're gonna instantly lose contrast. You gotta start dialing that contrast back. Let's keep pushing this up. Let's pull this contrast back. I'm gonna keep pushing this up. I'm gonna keep pulling the contrast back. Let's mess with our pivot here. It's actually not bad, is it? That's -1.5. So let's do some side-by-sides here. It's actually getting better. I actually like it better 1.5 stop under. And this is the whole point of doing the test. Finding the sweet spot of where you want to rock that image, right? Now, this is a cool look, I think. Now, again, this is no grade. This is just basic corrections, right? You're just seeing where you can get it, what's a look you like. I like how it almost transformed my face, right? It's almost like that contrast, a little bit of grittiness. I am almost becoming more masculine, right? If I was the star of my own movie here, I'd be like, yeah, go 1.5 under for my particular face. And that's the whole point, right? Ideally, you'd want to bring in, if not the actual talent. Well, that's why in big Hollywood, even stand-ins have to go in and audition. Take it from me, I was a stand-in for a long time. That's how I supplemented my acting career here in LA, right? So I've been Aaron Paul stand-in for a lot of stuff, a lot of celebrities, right? This look is nice. Look at that. I like that. That's my favorite so far, but let's keep going. Let's jump to -2 here. Let me apply the basic corrections. And okay, so that's it on its own, right? So let's AB in that, AB that. Let's see if we're still getting that weird magenta shift. No, she's still clean there. Still clean there at -2. Okay, so here we go. Offset first. I'm gonna push the offset up a little bit, turn that off. We're gonna bring back some of that contrast. I'm gonna start pushing the midtones up and bringing back the contrast. Push the shadows. That's probably about as far as I wanna bring that lift. We'll bring that back down a little bit. Let's push this back. Let's push this back, pushing it up, pushing it up. There we're getting somewhere. Look at that. Let's pull this back down. You know, I'm just pushing and pulling with the wheels here on the micro panel. Just pushing and pulling on the micro panel. Add a little bit more contrast to that. Let me check the brightness. I like to live my XDR display at around 75% brightness. Gets pretty close to what it will be on most monitors, especially all Macs. Let's add a little bit of contrast to that. Let's push this back up, right? We're just getting that. Now look at that. Ooh, I like that even better than -1.5, right? Wow, let's jump back and forth here. Oh, look, I pushed the brightness way too far on -1.5, right? Okay, so let's do it with this one. Let's go a little bit further with this. So there we go. Look at that. 2 stops under, and we're still able to get, but look at now, I want to do the AB with our original normal exposure, because you're going to see the color shift. There's normal, what a gray card would look in normal exposure. There's what a shadow would look like. These are what blacks and whites would look in normal exposure on the Sigma FP. And then as soon as we get over here, things start changing. We got purple fringing on our shadow. Our gray card has shifted pretty big out of gray card territory, right? So that's one of the problems. Let's jump to our vector scope and see what's going on with that. It's still leaning on that magenta side. So you would still have to get in here and we would have to pull back that magenta, right? Let's pull it back. I'm pulling it back now with the wheel, the ball. I'm pulling it back. Okay, something like that. Let's AB and off now. Still, you know, you're still getting away from that. But, you know, here's the thing. This is all aesthetic. It's up to the DP, colorist, director's choice. I like this -2. I do. Let's keep going. I mean, this is fun. I mean, look how much further we have gone already, right? We've gone already a full stop further than where you can go on the overexposure side with the FP. Quite the opposite of the Sonys, isn't it? Okay, let's go now. Now we're 2.5. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to apply the basic correction. Okay, no real difference there. And now let's start pushing it. Let's bring up my waveform first. Let's get to something we can work with. That's the offset. I'm going to pull these shadows back down. I'm going to pull this. I'm going to push this up, up, up. How far do we want to go? Maybe about right there. Maybe a little further. Pull that down, pull this down, add a little bit of contrast. looks like a mugshot, I just realized that. Okay, so this isn't too bad, is it? Maybe we'll move our pivot a little bit there. Let's jump to our vector scope. This is 2.5 stops underexposed, by the way. Going to our vector scope, I'm gonna pull back some so it's not so lean on the magenta side. This is basic corrections here, right? Just watching that skin tone indicator. Let's go back to the waveform. Look at that. Look how, this camera shines when you underexpose it. For instance, let's do it. Let's AB it against the normal exposure. Look at that normal exposure compared to the -2.5. I love it. I love underexposing this camera. That's why I say this is why. Why? This is why, man. Okay, let's jump to, now we're 3 stops under here. First thing I'm gonna do is apply the corrections, apply that. Now, one easy way is, another thing, I can't believe I totally bypassed this. One easy way to do this, go to your exposure right here in your raw tab and just go +3. Just bring it back. Boom, immediately it comes right back, right? That's a bonus. I can't believe I totally left that out in all the other tests we just did. But anyways, that's the easiest way to bring it back up to normal exposure. Okay, so now we've added the corrections to that. We've pumped the exposure back to normal exposure. So now that we've seen that, let's AB in that, right? There is a slight shift there still. Look at our gray card. Still a color shift there. Let me turn on the vector scope here. So that's normal exposure, right? And then if we put our -3 on there, yeah, she's still leaning a little bit. I would still want to make a little bit of corrections with this. Notice how clean it is though. There's not a whole lot of noise going on with this image at 3 stops under. We do have that little bit of halo purple fringing on the shadows there. Obviously the colors of the gray card are still off, but there's so much detail there to play with. You could even probably go further. You could go further underexposing this camera, hands down, easily, right? But the way that they outline in the test, it's only +3 or -3, so right? Because ideally, you wouldn't really, I mean, if you wanted to get into that territory to see how far you could push it in terms of, now you're getting into the more of a true dynamic range test. But this is a little bit more fun when you're crafting specific looks, right? Because you can totally bring that back. If you are fine-tuning something and you've been hired to be the cinematographer, the director of photography on it, these are things that you should be taking into consideration in crafting the image, knowing the sensor, taking ownership of your sensor. Okay, that was a biggie. I did not anticipate it going on that long, but but thank you for if you stuck around. Hey, if you are a die-hard dog timer, do me a favor, take a screenshot of this video and share it over any social media of your choice. Just be sure to tag me. It's easier for my Instagram. That's really the only one that I'm most active on. That's at KiddTech, KIDDTECH. So be sure to tag me there in the story, and I'll be sure to reshare that. Maybe pump some people your way, some followers your way, as well as getting the word out about taking ownership of your sensor, letting the ASC know that we are following suit out here as freelancer cinematographers. All right, thanks for watching, and we'll see you soon. That is a wrap.
All right.
You have to calibrate the meter for every setup, the same way you have to black shade your camera.